about how you build an outfit. And we need to teach a computer how to build an outfit. Because if we just offer you random suggestions, you're going to get sick of them and you're not going to look at them anymore. So we need to know all this information about every single piece of clothing in order to learn the patterns of what goes together and how we put it together. Right now we are not very good at that. I can put together a set of recommendations of opposite garments. So if you say I'm wearing this top, I can give you options for bottoms that might match. But really they're only very coarsely filtered. And the gap between being able to do that kind of very coarse filtering and to actually build a good outfit is enormous. And it's an area that has a lot of potential research. So if any of you are thinking about graduate school, that's a good topic. Okay, so this is a tiny bit of technology. And the goal of this technology is to help you with what's there. Help you use what's in your closet better. Maybe even help you buy something that you're more likely to use than something that you're less likely to use. But there's a lot more that we can do. And we can do a lot of that through embedding electronics, actually complex electronics. This doesn't even have a battery. It's a very passive thing that just spits out a number. But if we embed more complex systems, we can do more complex things. And the reason we might want to do that is primarily because electronics offer this ability to be dynamic or responsive, or smart, as we were talking about before. The clothing that we have now, you put it on in the morning, it does what it's doing all day long. It looks how it's looking all day long. You, the individual, are moving between environments, between situations, between social contexts, but your clothes are remaining the way that they were. We have some ability to transform them slightly. We can roll up our sleeves or take off a layer, or go into any fashion magazine and read the things on like day to night outfits. Add some earrings and suddenly it's dressier. But really, we're not doing much. We're not actually changing the clothes we have on. Electronics don't have that problem. They can. Your smartphone is one physical object that is everything. It can do anything. It can look like many different things, all into one piece of technology. So that's the lure. The challenge is that they are not textiles. They are not necessarily. They haven't evolved to sit close to the human body the way that clothing has. They're stiff, they're bulky, they're heavy, they're not durable, they're uncomfortable in many ways, and in many ways they're directly at odds with the things that we want out of clothing. And actually I can break that down further for you. In many cases they're actually fully directly at odds. Like the thing that the electronics needs is directly opposed with the thing that the human wants. So we have these pervasive problems of like making those two things work together. Okay, now clothing, on the other hand, what are we going to do with all this technology that we have? As I mentioned before, we have these protective or functional applications of clothing. We have these expressive or aesthetic applications of clothing. And these two things we could debate at some length, and actually I would love to do that. We don't have that much time. But they are sort of two different, maybe, purposes for clothing. And both areas have opportunities for technology. Let me start with protective or functional applications and this idea of smart or dynamic materials. So right now when you make a coat, you maybe put some insulation in it. The goal of that insulation is to add air and trap body heat. That's pretty much all it does. You are the furnace, you're creating all this energy, and we just want to make sure it stays around us and doesn't go off into the environment. Now when you put on that coat and you come inside, you're still creating that much heat, but now the environment has changed and the purpose is no longer appropriate. If instead we replace that insulation with a heat-generating textile, and on the right there is a X-ray of a heat-generating textile, now we can actually produce the heat instead of trapping body heat, which allows us to turn on the heat when it's appropriate, turn off the heat when it's appropriate, and allows that jacket to be a little bit more dynamic. You have a thinner, lighter weight jacket that can meet the needs of a heavier jacket. And we can talk more about the details of how that happens if you like, but I won't spend time. Another example, the functional or protective function of clothing to provide night visibility for runners or whatever, usually done through passive textiles that take ambient light and send it back to the viewer. So the retroreflective trim on that jacket is doing that from the camera flash. It's returning that camera flash back to the camera. With electronic technology, we can now generate light instead of capturing ambient light, and provide that light on demand. So only in situations where you need night visibility, you could turn on an active, like an EL panel, like what you see in the back of that jacket right there. But beyond these kind of applications are maybe what you think of when you think of smart clothing, like why we might do this is to, make things work better. Arguably, fashion is fairly stagnant right now. I would argue to you that the last true innovation that we had in fashion was neon colors in the 80s. But there are many hairs to split there as well. And maybe you're familiar with this designer from the 60s, Paco Rabanne. He's quoted as having said that there's nothing new in fashion except materials. Materials are the only thing that can drive true innovation, because basically we've been through all the silhouettes already and there's not much left to do. Again, that's a contentious statement, but if you think about it in terms of materials and in terms of what materials do, adding electronic materials is even more dramatic in some ways than other types of new materials that have been introduced, like lycra or like neon colors or different means of printing or weaving or knitting. Because they're so versatile. They're not just versatile in one property like stretch or the way that they manage light, but they are all properties. That you can affect almost any property with some sort of electronic structure. So the potential is enormous, right? I mean, the potential is almost unlimited. The challenges are also almost unlimited, but the potential is so compelling. But almost more importantly, it's so compelling for the reasons that he's talking about, for reasons of design and the reasons behind how we are normally wearing clothing, how we're wearing it today. So you think back to what we were talking about in the wardrobe, you have this huge pile of clothing and there's a reason, and that reason is probably because each piece is doing something. Each piece has its purpose, it has its aesthetic, it communicates something about you, or it completes a whole in a specific way, or it is useful in this one environment like rock climbing or something like that. And all of that is functionality, all that is necessary and needed in some way. But in developing technology, we're sort of almost just focusing on these functional things, like what can it specifically do, and not necessarily what is clothing doing, and how can I do that in a better way using technology. So in a very simple example, think about like the t-shirt. That's a very standardized garment form, right? T-shirts are mass-produced at a scale that almost nothing else is mass-produced. And they are very similar to each other. We know a lot about the materials, we know a lot about the construction, we can do it practically without even human hands touching it. So that's something that the shape, the physical structure itself is really not doing a lot differently, all the different t-shirts. What they're doing differently is presenting a different message, having a different aesthetic. You're changing the graphic and the graphic alone. So think about technology in that case. If we could embed a dynamic graphic into a t-shirt, you could have one t-shirt that is all t-shirts, right? Every other t-shirt in your closet you could throw away. You could have the one, you go to a concert, you download the graphic, and you buy it for 99 cents in the App Store or something like that, and now you have a new t-shirt, except it's the same t-shirt. And all of that waste in the clothing, or in the wardrobe, can collapse down to one t-shirt. Now, you may be thinking of some of the problems with doing that, and some of the problems might be, how am I going to wash that, and I'm not wearing that shirt every single day, that's gross. But I would argue back at you that that's not insurmountable. I mean, there are people in this world today who wear their clothes an awful lot more than we wear ours in this country, or at least as much as we admit wearing ours. Because Americans are notoriously, two-faced about that. I mean, we don't want to admit how infrequently we wash our clothing. We pretend that we wash it every single time we wear it, but that's actually not true when you study it. But there are countries in which that's not a problem. Culturally, that's not a problem. They acknowledge that you don't smell bad and you're not offending anybody, so that's fine. So we already have a little bit of play. We already have some additional wearings we can get out of our clothes. And if we take that a little further and we start looking at the factors that are making clothes not repetitively wearable, then we can maybe overcome some of those things. So if your clothes didn't smell bad, didn't look rumpled, didn't have stains on them, would it be a problem that you're wearing it more than less? What if your clothes are actually cleaning you, So there's a lot of potential, but I think it requires flipping that paradigm on its head. So instead of trying to build clothes that have, like every t-shirt has a new set of electronics in it, and making electronics cheaper, smaller, lighter, faster, so that we can have 100 copies of the same technology, I think it might be more important to make one t-shirt that is all t-shirts, and then let it be all technology, so that we have one instead of having a million. We only have one phone, and that does an awful lot, And I'd replace my t-shirt every 2 years if that was the product cycle. But it doesn't mean having 600 batteries go to the dump every year when you decide you don't like that t-shirt anymore. Okay, so expressive functions, I think, really important and really, really under-investigated in wearable technology. Maybe because it's dominated by researchers in fields that are traditionally focused on classic functions rather than expression and aesthetics, and people tend to undervalue that purpose of clothing. Okay, beyond the two types of functionality, we also have other advantages in clothing that are important for deciding on, good directions or good applications. And these are my three favorites. One, clothing is socially ubiquitous. That means that it's with you everywhere, in every social situation, almost, pervasively, continuously throughout your day, and probably your night as well. That means that it has access to you in many situations. It knows you continuously. And again, if you're changing your clothes, maybe it doesn't have that memory, but if you're not changing your clothes, then it does have that memory. Secondly, it's physically proximal. It's close to your skin, and that gives technology the access to your body in a way that's brand new. So right now, your phone has access to your body, and if any of you have used apps that are like, I think there's some pedometer apps, there's a sleep app that tracks the way your body's moving on the bed, certain things related to health and fitness. They all use the same set of sensors, like 2 or 3 sensors. And those sensors are embedded in the phone, and they track physical movements, so accelerations and orientation, things like that. But they're in the phone, so they're one point in space, this point in space. And I can put that point at various places on my body, but it's still one point. Whereas clothing is touching you everywhere, which means that it has access to the movements of all the different parts of your body. It has access to parts of your body that are better at communicating certain signals. So for instance, pulse or heart activity, breathing sounds, temperatures at your core and your extremities, all different physiological signals. But in order to get a really rich picture of you, we need access to all of those places. We can't just have one point of data. So it's really important to spread things out over the body. And getting back to socially ubiquitous, requiring you to strap something on and put on, maybe they're stickers, put on stickers all over your body is a little bit too burdensome. Honestly, unless you were about to die, unless you did this, you probably wouldn't do it, especially on a daily basis. But you do put on your clothes every day. So it's already there, it's already a platform into which you can embed a lot of stuff that's convenient. The final factor is that it's large in surface area. And this is important for certain applications like, say, solar energy harvesting. Just having a lot of space in which to put things. Also important for display. We've been talking about display in terms of like how my clothes look to other people, but maybe they're actually communicating a message to somebody. Maybe your friend can read their text messages on your short shirt or something like that. But that large surface area comes in handy. This is a really small surface area, and it was getting smaller, and now with tablets it seems to be getting bigger, and I don't know where it'll end up. But we have human physical limitations in perception. This can only get so small before it's not really very usable anymore. And we have this big surface that we could use for other things if we had the right technology. Now,